Hi, and welcome to the next Mancala edition of What to Do to Make It Even Look Better. And in this episode, we'll go ahead and talk about giving some color to your Mancala. Again, it's just a console. The next step would be actually to put it into a nice user interface. So there's two things I'm going to go over. One is how to ANSI color your Mancala board, and the other is how to add a structure. If you notice then on the previous examples, because I hadn't taught about structure yet, I had multiple arrays, three, of three elements. One just arbitrary, and the second two for the players. This time I'm going to make a structure with all the variables I need in it. And this makes it a lot nicer and a lot easier to manipulate the program and to make it so that I can actually go through and reduce the amount of code needed, because I can do a lot of the code just once, and depending on which player it is, then it will handle everything properly. So on this is I have a history as found in Ultra Board. So there's a history of the game. And also, as you go through, you can see all the different videos I did. And then down here, adding color and player. And I also have a link here that will show you then a description of what a structure is. And it'll just bring you in. And that's another thing I'd like to do, is just some HTML, because this will bring you into the array vectors and header section. And notice it then brings you into that page and then brings you down to the section about vectors and structures, which has a little comparison between arrays and vector type and structures, where arrays and vectors can only handle one particular data type, whereas structures can handle multiple. But the difference is arrays and structures are fixed size, whereas vectors are easily expanded. And then that gets you into there. Then the next thing is I have adding colors. And on it is, if I update this page, then if you notice, it has both colors and background colors, and also general ANSI items that you can go ahead and set brightness, and then also reset so that it clears all the color and background settings. Then this has the description. And then in here then is a description, but it's very similar to the actual structure. Again, a struct is how you set up a structure in C++, and this is a player structure. Then I have name and defaults to player. If you notice, I have defaults to everything, because I'm just going to default to games as 0, wins, losses, ties. And then the Mancala for each pair, and low pit, high pit. I do have these set to 0, but these will have to be set because player 2 and player 1 have different values. For player 1, the Mancala is 6, the low pit is 0, the high pit is 5. And likewise for player 2, it's 13, 7, and at C12. So again, 1 is Mancala is 6, 0 through 5, and player 2 is 13, and then 7 through 12. So that's it for that. Then the video that you're seeing now is going to go right there. So let me just go ahead and start in with the code itself. Here is the header file. If you notice, then you can copy this directly from the web page, just so you'll have all this information. And then the struct, again, is player, default player. All these have default values, but player 1, I'm going to have to set to 6, 0, and 5, and player 2 to 13, 7, and 12. So if there are any questions about that, just go ahead and put the questions in the comment below, and we'll see if we can answer those. And then I'm going to go back to the code. And then in the code, if you notice, then this is where I gathered the information for single structure, and it's also where I added the information about colors. Okay, so we probably should do that. So then I always like to keep track of when I've modified something and why I've modified it. This is a good habit to get into. When you get into programming, it is vital, because then you know what you've done, when you've done it, and if you wanted to add a why you did it, then go ahead and do so. Again, in order to bring in the header file, which has the structure in it and the ANSI definitions, then I need to have player.h. And then I haven't done much to player moves. Okay, these are called prototypes, and these will often be defined in a header file if I had these in different modules. But right now, anything to be used has to be defined before it is used. So I have a player moves, a initialize players, find winner, check empty side, and store statistics, all as functions I can call. Then here is where I start using the structure. And so I have players. If you notice, then I'm using the structure player. I'm making a variable called players, and I'm making it into an array of 3 elements. So it's a fixed size. And then I just set file name base. If I really wanted to, I could have this changed, but I just wanted it as a standard one, so I can go ahead and do the input output. I've already gone through the file once. And then just the only thing I'm going to go through now is the colors and the, let's see. So color reset, actually, I'm going to change that because I want all dots to be white. So I'm changing that to white. And then this is the main part where I'm changing things, is on player 1, player 2. Then in both printing out the numbers, which is just the printing out the I, I'm going to have all asterisks as white. And then I'm just going to say color bright, but then I switched the color to bright color. So then I'm going to set the color to black when I'm doing cyan. That's the only way it showed up. I tried various other colors, but it shows up best with the black color. Then cyan for the who's ahead. Originally I had green, but that didn't really show enough contrast. And then in here, if you notice, then this is not showing up. And so often I will just go ahead and put it on a new line so I can read it a little bit easier. And then if it's let's see, this is just checking on who's ahead, and if neither are ahead, then they're the same. And so I'm just setting the background to yellow. And then in this case, I am going ahead and setting the color again to white. If it's not, okay, in other words, this is the numbers going across. So if it is not the Mancala, and if I wanted to, I could put the Mancala down here, but I'm just using 13. And then I do ANSI color reset always at the end, so it doesn't carry over any of the background. I do not want the background carried over, otherwise it looks really weird beyond that. And then I do the same thing. If you notice, the only difference between these two is in here I use I, and here I use board sub I. And if I really wanted to cut down on code, I could actually then parameterize this and then just up here in the routine set the value I'm going to be using to either I or board sub I. And then print players. One is the same identical as print player 2. In a later video, I might just show you how to condense all this into a loop going through twice, and then just having a parameter of the player being sent in, so you don't have to have a print player 1 line and a print player 2 line. So this is where I print the board, and I distinguish between printing player 2, the middle line going across, print player 1, and then here is where I initialize in main. I initialize the information for player 1 and player 2. If you notice, I leave players sub-0 blank. And this makes it a lot easier because player 1 will be identified as with the 1, and likewise player 2. And so therefore, I'm just setting it up so it's easy to identify and I don't have to do any subtractions. So, okay, they're going through. I've already gone through this, is on the initial gain. Oh, I just reset up the board. Again, I've gone over this, but just a reminder, so that I go through and reset the board to the default condition anytime I start a new game, and anytime I start a new game, I update both players' games count. And then going through, those are the main changes I did. And then this is where I go through and I initially set the player name to name, and then go through and set everything else to 0 to begin with. But if I open the mancala.txt file and I go through and then read in the information that's in the file for each line for each player, and if the player name matches, then I go ahead and load up the information that was stored. Then I don't write this out into the backup file. And notice I do have a out file for back. And so if I don't find a item, then I go ahead and just go ahead and then write out the names to the backup file, which I will use later. And this just allows me to keep track of everything that, I mean, all the players that have ever played it. And if you notice, then I say found equals true if it comes all the way down here. And then this does not get executed. So it does not rewrite the two names of the two players into the backup file. And later on, I will go ahead and copy everything in. And then notice I start using players 1 and 2. And then give the people a chance to enter the information. The other thing, again, I emphasize is always have information about what the function is, and then what the inputs and outputs are, and then what the purpose is. I have gone back to programs that I haven't touched in 1 to 3 years. And if I have to go back into it, having these comments has been so helpful. So I highly recommend it for anybody that does any programming, especially if you plan on working on files for long periods of time. Then the other thing is, if somebody else puts in these header files or header comments for each function, it makes it so much easier, because in industry, you often take over other people's code. And it is very helpful for you taking it over if they have information that really is helpful and accurate. Please keep these all up to date, because if you change a parameter, like if I put in here that I'm putting in some other parameter, I need to make sure this is changed and make sure everything is up to date. And then I'm going to print board, and this is just then I clear it out. This is what the system, in quotes, CLS does, is it clears the console so it can then have a clean picture of what's going on. Sometimes for debugging, you might want to comment that out, because you'd want to see what is happening each rendition or each turn. So then empty side just checks to see if the side is empty. The other thing is, a couple of students had a problem with, they made a mistake, like all names are case sensitive. And so if you have check and then a lowercase e empty side, if that's the way you call it, it will not match. And consequently, you might have a problem, it will not compile. And therefore, you will have mistakes, and it might be a hard thing to find. And so you have to be very, very careful. This is all case sensitive. And those are the main changes in here. Then if you notice the player stores statistics, I go through the loop twice. This is where I actually do use an index and is really helpful. And then I just go ahead and load in the players. Notice on the right, I always have a space or tab in between the information, because a space or a tab is used to delineate the parameters that are put into a file. And so when I go ahead and read it, then having that space there allows me to read the name, and then it knows the space, so it goes on to read the games, etc. And that's it for that. So then the next thing is just to show you what the board looks like. And if you just go ahead and type in 2 items, notice it prints out what the game statistics are. Then if I choose random, then if you notice the program, it has black on yellow to indicate it's a tie. So then starting off, it's always best to do 2. And notice that the side changes to blue. It's a cyan color, which is sort of a bluish green. And the reason why I choose blue-green instead of green is sometimes there might be colorblind people. And so cyan is actually a little bit better than green because sometimes people have a hard time differentiating between green and red if they're red-green colorblind. And then a white or a yellow on the cyan just is not enough contrast. So I put in a black number. And then I chose to both do the number of the pit and also the number of tokens in the pit so that I can go ahead and then have it stand out a little bit more. When you do designs, you need to make sure the results you want to see stand out a little bit more. That's one reason why I chose the numbers in bold. And also I chose the number of pits in yellow so that it shows out a little bit more. And it's my turn again, so I'm just going to do a 5. And then the other side, trying to get caught up, is 8. And then maybe a 12. Then the one thing on Mancala, just to show you something, notice they're the same, so they go back to yellow. And if I do a 0, then on capturing stones, notice it landed in the 5 pit. And notice how now the 5 pit and the 7 pit, which are the opposite pits, are both empty, and all those stones were added into the Mancala. This is just a brief introduction of doing color and using a structure, and I hope it has been helpful. So we'll see you in the next video. Take care.